Scott Woods here. It's November 29th, 2009, talking with Bob Dobbs in Maui. How you doing, Bob?
Great. I'm enjoying what we've done and looking forward to tonight.
Excellent. Well, we have a few sort of areas we wanted to probe around in, I guess, but I wanted to actually start, Bob, with something I almost wish I had started or asked you in the first chat we did a few weeks ago. It just kind of seems so glaringly obvious that, well, why didn't I start with this? So I want you to just, if you can, describe for me what you think the role of the critic is traditionally, and what, if anything, is the role of the critic today.
Do you mean a rock critic or any level of criticism?
No, just a critic in general, because, you know, I've listened a lot, I've heard you describe a lot, you talking about the role of the artist and that sort of thing, and how there can be no artists today because we're all living inside the situation, is I think how you put it. So how does the critic, I'm interested in the critic's relationship to the artist. So,
well, the critic, I would take the broadest interpretation, begins with the shaman in tribal societies. The critic is someone who shows you how to see through the situation you're inside of. So the shaman used to put them on drugs, right? Plant drugs, do different healing techniques, and then you get more complex societies, agricultural societies, and that might still have the shaman thing, but the critic might be the priest. And then you move into writing, and then the critic becomes a Plato and write stuff. So the critic is always trying to show you the world and create a detachment or a lightening up, making less heavy your burdens of consciousness. Right. So that the most general expression of that is McLuhan's term, anti-environmental. McLuhan said any person of integral awareness, whether artistic, scientific, or humanistic, and then we could throw in tribalistic, shamanistic, knows the situation, the ground rules of his environment, and throws light on it, or allows you to be freed from it in a way. So that is not just having a point of view. You can a musician gets everybody dancing. That gets them out of the routine of the culture. So dancing can be anti-environmental. All the arts and sciences are critical.
Okay. But
they have different sensory versions, different media, depending on the society they're in.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So what about, but if what you've said in the past that there can be, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there can be no artists today because everyone is now living inside of the situation under the satellite condition.
Right. The question is, how does one throw light on the world we live in? How do you create a light through? How do you create a way of providing, as Zappa would call it, aristocratic poise, aristocratic detachment, a way of not being fooled by the environment and conditioned by it? Where do you begin? This was the problem Joyce started, and Lewis came up with it. He wrote a book, Wyndham Lewis, in 1934, Men Without Art. He was describing how hard the traditional role of the artist to offer this insight was in a mass media society. And then McLuhan picked up that problem. He said, what's the role of the book? He invented a way to write books that he thought were able to show light, hold up the environment, a mirror. Remember, it's the famous story of the Gorgon monster. Whoever was Perseus, one of those Greek guys, mythical characters, he took on Gorgon the monster, who, if you looked at him, he would turn you to stone. You didn't have a chance if you looked directly at Gorgon the monster. So he came up with a mirror, and he reflected Gorgon's image into the mirror, so he wasn't looking directly at Gorgon, and he slew the Gorgon monster because he found a way to deflect.
Ah, okay.
So, and that's the role of the artist, the critic, is to provide a way of showing the situation without numbing you, without creating another hypnosis. Okay. So the mirror image that Perseus used is archetypal example of the role of metaphor. You hold up, all arts and sciences and criticism are media mirrors, or what McLuhan called the analogical mirror. You reflect back what's happening, and it's the only way to deal with the environment. So everybody's always embedded in the present in their conditioning. So how do you get that mirror to show you what you're inside of, because what you're inside of is turning you to stone? So Gorgon was a dramatic metaphor for the power of the environment over you. Okay, so what is the mirror today? You got so many mirrors. You got movies, music, all the entertainment. They're all analogical mirrors. They're all criticisms. They're all enhancements of the situation. What is the role of the traditional individual mind? Or even McLuhan definitely didn't put on the individual mind. He said the critic had to be a corporate role, had to not have his personal views in there. It was the only way to deal with such a colossal, electrified, impersonal environment. So
right.
What is the way to make an analogical mirror? And none of the arts can do that. None of the arts can do it. That's why we come back to Finnegan's Wake. It is the most furthest out expression, the most ridiculous Baroque mirror, but it's a way of actually looking at the dynamism that goes on in the Gorgon monster of the environments we live in, and all the entertainments, and all the drugs, all the informational drugs. So what's the mirror today? And that's what Meltzer is wrestling with. He's trying to figure out, he's saying, look, I took philosophy, that doesn't really help me with rock and roll and rock, but rock is doing something. It's some kind of criticism of my environment, or at least inspire me to look at what's going on. And then he wrestles with that because that's just a literate response to it. And so he doesn't know if rock is a mirror or not, or whether there can be a mirror.
Okay. So bringing it down to the level of rock critics, then, is it more accurate to say that rock critics can't offer any real criticism, or that rock criticism in and of itself is not a form of criticism because it's only focused on the literary or chemical body response or something?
Or the consumption role. Yeah, you could say, the question is it rock criticism and environmental? Now, part of McLuhan said in an interview in the late 60s in Newsweek or something, he said, we do this because everybody else is doing it. And here's everybody in the late 60s trying to be an independent, not be subject to mass conformity. And McLuhan's putting on that, I have no problem being involved in the mass. That's the other aspect. Whether you even need an anti-environmental role anymore, McLuhan's questioning in the 60s. Because the environment itself provides anti-environment, because a new technology comes in, upsets everything that people assume, and it makes people wonder what the heck's going on and knocks them out of their habits of perception. And then you have a turnover of these technological inventions, what McLuhan called a rapid series of airsats, anti-environments. A rapid sequence of innovations is an airsats anti-environment. It's a fake anti-environment, but it's the only anti-environment we're going to get. So he wasn't too concerned about using the individualist mind as an anti-environment. He knew that wouldn't work anymore. So actually saying things like, here's this guy looking like he's an anti-environment in the mid-60s, coming up with statements like, I have no problem with what's going on. We just try to get along. He's not maintaining the Ben Watson, anti-environmental critical stance, so to speak. So he raised the question whether there can be an anti-environment. Says the technologies and those new quick environments that come every couple of months, or no, let's say every few years back then, they were anti-environmental. So what do you do about that? Well, basically, he thought you can be an anti-environmental by pointing that out, because nobody noticed it. Nobody was saying that. So rock criticism is just it's almost like if the technologies are environmental, that means that anybody can be an anti-environment for 15 minutes. And the Beatles were that, the Stones were that, Mickey Mantle was that, Babe Ruth, whatever is attracting attention that reinforces your cultural values, which are being shattered all the time. See, the new role of criticism becomes a preservation as well as a revolutionary radical movement. Because if the environment is changing you, maybe you might want to provide a way for people to feel secure in all those changes.
Okay, yeah.
Now, music definitely does that. Music is the drug of the 20th century. It gives people instant comfort.
To stabilize.
Yeah, and that might be a useful anesthetic or anti-environmental role because it calms you down, gives you a little satisfaction. So rock criticism is a statement within the realm of rock music or entertainment consumption of music, and so it's a subset. It's definitely not on the big level that you said we've just come down to. You said, okay, let's bring it down to the rock criticism level, where I was talking on the vast level of the role of the shaman critic. So it's on a puny level. But what's funny is that the critics think they're at the top of the mountain. They think they got some important cultural role, the rock critics, and they don't want to see how puny it is what they're doing. They're just operating in the music industry. And that's Meltzer's dilemma. He quickly sees that. He says, what's the point of doing any of this stuff? And then he tries to figure out, though, how to continue being a writer. So he probably doesn't have to work in the factory, right?
Right.
So it takes him a while to figure out how to get a role to write and not have to be stuck in the industry. So he ends up in California and writing for weekly papers. But so there's nothing to be taken. Rock criticism is not something to be taken seriously, but we can use it to show some interesting dimensions of what's going on, which is what I always do. I always take what's given and then show some interesting patterns. Like McLuhan says, if I'm in a bad movie, I get patterns out of that too. Doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what you're getting processed by the entertainment information environment you're involved in. That's a given. You're getting processed. If you're getting all upset about it and not hating the music, well, that's okay. But if I could find a way to make some thinking out of it and then express it to someone or in a public forum, that's interesting. But I don't put any. We can't beat the Android meme. You can't beat the Android meme. And what is maybe inexcusable is people who claim that their writings or criticism or their role as a consumer guide is offering something revolutionary or practical or big. No, it's only temporary what they're doing, and we got no problem with that. Yeah, someone's got to just tell you what albums came out this week, and if you're interested, and you got to figure out what to consume. But that's all gone now. Jesus, nobody controlling any consumption. Everybody consume whatever they want for free.
Right. Okay.
So, but we're going back to the interesting sociological phenomenon of baby boomers, and they think the ultimate cultural goal is to be a writer, a Norman Mailer or a Tolstoy or something. They have that goal as a writer, and we watch them flounder around for 40 years trying to be a writer.
That's my life you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people. A lot of people, educated people, are in that fate.
Yeah,
in that syndrome. It's not just you.
Yeah, for sure.
And I look at it as, okay, here's a Westerner, trying to be a Westerner, trying to keep writing and books on the eye visual space going as a critical and environmental role. And you will see that the only book that does it is Finnegan's Wake. If you want to look at a potential anti-environment, critical shamanistic role, the Wake does it. And it preserves the book, the writerly phenomenon. But, of course, you can't just stay with that, so then you have to come up with new ways to translate or redo what the Wake was doing, and that's what McLuhan did.
Okay. And are you providing an anti-environment?
Yeah, I'm the update of that tradition. Or at least, I mean, my charts have Finnegan's Wake embedded in them. It's all about Finnegan's Wake. And then I have a patina of Zappa level there, because Zappa is an updating of the Wake in the post-book world.
Okay. We won't go into this in detail now, or maybe we won't ever go into detail of this because you've done it elsewhere, no doubt. But just, I don't know, I'm thinking, you keep mentioning Finnegan's Wake, and this is kind of a thing about rock criticism, and I'm sure if anyone's listening to this, they're probably going, what? Finnegan's Wake? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So the question I have about Finnegan's Wake, and I do own a copy of the book, and I've, tried to sort of read it, and I'm determined, to kind of keep trying. But really, how do you read it? Like, I know Marshall McLuhan had the point about, well, you read it like TV or something, and you open a page, and, you read it like dots on the page or something. But then I know you and Ben Watson said something interesting once, where I think Ben was making the point that, I don't read Finnegan's Wake to just wash over me. Implying that he actually is like reading it and absorbing each. I don't know. I'm confused. Like, how do you tell someone who knows? Because I was trying to even explain these conversations to my brother, and I don't think he really even heard of Finnegan's Wake, and I'm kind of trying to describe it to him, and he was like, wow, what is that? Like, it sounds real.
Yes,
and I could not begin to tell him how to read it because I haven't figured out how to read it.
Okay, so here's the story I tell, which is the best thing to say to people. Because why does McLuhan say that Finnegan's Wake is not a book, it's a radio program? Well, here's the story to explain that. Here's Joyce in the 20s. He's produced a great novel, 1922, Ulysses, and he's making a splash with it, and it seems pretty avant-garde, and it influences a lot of people, and he's a culture hero, at least in Europe. The book gets banned in America, and there's a lot of notoriety on that level, and that's still 1934. So here he is sitting there. Now he's thinking, okay, what am I going to write next? He's a writer. What's he going to write? So he has a shortwave radio, and he's listening to shortwave radio, and he can hear German, Dublin, then Danish, English, French, all this stuff on his shortwave radio. And he's thinking, geez, I am writing about being an exile from Dublin, but I can go and hear Dublin on my shortwave radio. I'm right there. So where am I? And so he thought, well, let's since everybody was this was the new technology, radio, the new amazing, wonderful thing, Windows 95, okay, and this is an amazing experience for people. So he goes up and down the dial and hears all this stuff. Now he's saying, now this is what a lot of people are living inside of. This is the Gorgon. This is the monster that they're enjoying or getting pissed off at, and political movements are starting up with the radio. Guys getting on there and ranting like Hitler. And he says, how does the book provide an anti-environment or a mirror to this situation? Well, he thinks to himself, why don't I just paint what the thing is? So I'll paint on each page, or on my first page, going up and down the dial of the shortwave radio, or the radio, whatever it is. I think it's shortwave at that point. And so he just collaged a whole bunch of different languages. So you look at a book page, and you see these different languages, and you can't read 99% of it, but you recognize all these different languages. He's saying, look, you can't read this. You think you have to read it, and you don't understand these languages, but you actually are having this experience if you have a shortwave radio. You're living this. You can turn the dial and hear German. You don't know what it is, but you can hear it. He is painting the actual present environment of communication. It's just a painting of the present.
Okay.
It's like saying, here's I'm reflecting back to you what you're experiencing in our society. So then once that's the hidden ground, or that's what you're actually seeing, and most people don't get that. They don't notice that he's just painting shortwave radio experience, which is around for anybody to have. So they start reading the book as a book and try to figure out what the languages mean. And so Joyce is like partly laughing. They can't see. And then he writes a book. Then he fills in the thought content. He fills in lots of ideas, saying, isn't it interesting? A new environment comes in, and people can't see it. They think it's the previous environment. And you can find all kinds of quotes, and McLuhan's really good at pointing out these quotes in his book, McLuhan's book, War and Peace in the Global Village, 1968. Right. All kinds of key Finnegan's Wake quotes, which, if you know what I'm saying, applies to Finnegan's Wake. You can see these quotes tell you, they're Joyce telling you what he's doing. And you can read them once you understand that. And like there's, what was I going to say? There was one where he says on page 81 of Finnegan's Wake, I think I've said this before, the viability of vicinals are invincible if invisible. Okay. So the vicinals are your immediate environment. So what radio is doing to us are invisible if you can't see the environment. And he knows you're not seeing it right in your book form. in his book, which was at that time called Work in Progress. So you can see him saying, "Oh, the print did that, writing did that, speech did that. They were all invisible environments that people walled around in and didn't know the effects of." So and he says, now with such a rapid change in new inventions, we can actually see look, radio, look what it's doing to us, look what it's made up of, and people don't recognize when I show it in a book form.
Okay.
So he says that's right now in the 20th century, early part of the 20th century, we have enough rapid change that I can actually begin to see this pattern. So he actually came up with a new shamanistic vision.
Okay, so I wouldn't want to get hung up on this point, but I am kind of curious. Like, is it actually is it documented that he, like with the shortwave radio thing, like that actually kind of triggered the book? Or?
Yeah, you can. People visit him, said he would listen to the radio. You know,
okay.
There's no statements. You see, the first section of Finnegan's Wake, the very first. It wasn't called Finnegan's Wake, but he wrote about, I think it was 5 or 6 little vignettes, which seemed to be about quaint fables, and
right.
But in one of them, it's on page like 382, 383 of Finnegan's Wake. He describes King Roderick. He says, King Roderick, the last pre-electric king of Ireland. There it is, pre-electric.
Yeah. And
then he says radio beamer tower. You see the reference to radio right there in the first sentence.
Yeah.
But that's on page 383. Later in the final book, you don't know it's the beginning part, the first thing he wrote, unless you do some scholarship. You know,
right.
Read some books and find out what was written first. But the last pre-electric king of Ireland, because he's talking about like 1200 A.D. and then Ireland's in slavery for 800 years. Like Henry II comes over from Bristol or something, and it begins to enslave Ireland in 1200 or something like that, which is very close to the date that's sprinkled all the way through the book, 1132.
Okay.
So there it is, talking about modern technology right away in the first sentence. The last pre-electric king. Now it's 1922-23, and Dublin is finally, Ireland has finally had its revolution, becomes it's sort of an independent country in 1922.
Right.
So he's saying, wow, radio allowed these guys to pull it off and recapture Ireland.
Okay.
Not all of it. They didn't get Northern Ireland, but it was the beginning. So he was processing the events going on in his own country and looking at the hidden ground of communication that made it possible.
Okay.
So you're saying, your brother can used to be able to tune into C. Callahan, and someone is playing some collage, some sampling stuff.
Right.
You have to say, this is how Joyce saw the environment he was in with radio, and he painted it on the book. He cut and pasted like an assemblage. People thought he was writing prose and typing. Well, he was collaging like the Dadaists who were doing it with paintings.
Right.
But no one thought someone could do that in a book.
So when you're reading it, is that
that's the beginning. That's the beginning.
Is that what you're looking for, sort of thing? Or?
Well, you look at the book and you say, okay, I'm not going to find a story in here.
Yeah.
This is a collage. This is a sampling of his environment. But what's interesting is that he organizes it with 10 thunders, each one referring to a phase in technological history. And then you look at the cluster of words that he planted in around each thunder, and you see how it becomes dated to each era. Then you begin to see how to see the patterning and how the story, if there's a story, it's about some guy who's a tavern keeper and his wife is cleaning up the tavern and putting the kids to bed, and that's all it is. It's actually just showing, the story is a bunch of humans in a tavern listening to the radio.
Right.
And eventually a TV shows up there. And it's just their daily life. It's like a day in the life. Ulysses is a day in the life of Leopold Bloom during the day. Well, this is like Leopold Bloom dreaming at night. But Joyce recognizes that the dream has been extended into movies and radio. So they're dreaming awake. Finnegan's awake. So you start getting fragments, enjoying the ideas and patterns you get from skipping around the book, like you would if you were listening to the radio, skipping from dial to dial. That's the experience. So it's not a book. That's how you begin. and you don't spend time trying to figure out what each line means, at least not at the beginning. Later, since there's so many scholars who have done that, there's now Roland McHugh's annotations. He lists the top 3 interpretations of every line almost, and then you can start looking for book kind of content and ideas. But it all melts away under the larger dynamic of that it's not a book.
Okay.
So it's rock and roll in print.
Right, okay. But Ben countered when you said that it was rock and roll in print. He seemed to have some problem with that, saying that, you know, rock and roll itself is not something you can put into print. Right.
Well, I don't know if he would say that, but he wasn't sure.
I might be misinterpreting.
Yeah, he doesn't like. Well, he thinks he's a writer. He's logocentric, loves to talk or use his mouth and to write. He is using Finnegan's Wake for writerly images and ideas, and to mold his mouth and speak and say and play with sound.
Right.
He's focusing on only 1 or 2 of his senses, whereas the Wake is there for all the senses and for the extended senses, which are the technologies. He's only gradually now, he's writing to me saying, I'm beginning to appreciate the electric ether or see what McLuhan's pointing at and how that could be hinted at in the Finnegan's Wake. So he sees Finnegan's Wake as a book, but not limited to normal book literary standards, and it's something to play with. And that's a valid use of the book, but I include other levels.
Okay. Well, let's move on to case study Frank Zappa.
Right.
So we're going to go into some of the Meltzer stuff, Meltzer and Zappa, Meltzer versus Zappa, Meltzer plus Zappa, however you want to look at it. But explain what you've meant on several occasions when you've described Frank Zappa as not really being a musician.
Like Finnegan's Wake, it's not a book. I mean, Zappa is quoted as saying that he's a communicator who will use anything to get across a point. His interviews, TV shows. He always wanted to have a TV show. He just wanted to get into the mix. So he wasn't trying to. Okay, we should say it this way. In 1967, you ever read the Jazz and Pop interview with him?
I don't think so.
Okay, it's probably available online somewhere. Here he is in Jazz and Pop being interviewed, and he says, I'm starting a political party called the Interested Party. And within a year, he's talking about, among his colleagues, like Cal Schenkel, the artist, and maybe some of them others, about running for president. But he doesn't really, he talks about it, but he claims that Tom Wilson, is it? Yeah, the producer.
Producer, right?
Yeah. He in a couple interviews he has discussions of Tom Wilson running for president. The point is that Zappa saw that the media could be hijacked, at least from his young perspective, not on the deep McLuhan level, which would say no, you can't hijack it. You can only maybe do it for 10 minutes. That was Warhol's insight. But Zappa thought, let's use this medium, this pop radio that has access to all these smart kids or just kids, and we can get them organized as a political force. He purposely went into rock to organize a political force. Remember for the Money album, the song "We're the Other People," where the other people found a way to get to you.
Right. Yeah.
And to organize you. So he is taking the technologies of the day, the communication forms, and hijacking it. He's not just trying to be an entertainer or to be a composer. That is the front. That's the alibi. Oh, we're here to play you music, for your high school dance or something. Or we're here to entertain with the symphony orchestra. But he has an agenda. He's going to use that medium, music, to be a temporary critic, wake you up, give you a relief, be the shamanistic role. But he had a larger agenda because he said, man, we can use this to get power. Now that's what any real artist is a serious artist is doing that. They are criticizing society, and they say, I think maybe I should be running it. You know what I mean? I think I'd do it better than you, sir.
Right.
There is that megalomaniac level. And, it's very interesting in the Jazz and Pop interview where Frank Kosky's interviewing him, And Zappa, this guy's just saying, hey, you put on a good show here at the Garrick Theater. It's very entertaining. Well, Zappa says, I'm starting a political party. And like he might have thought, well, that's odd, or megalomaniacal or something.
Wow. Wasn't Frank Zappa very political, right?
Yeah, he was a Marxist critic.
He was a Marxist, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and in that interview, I think I've discussed it with Ben, he brings up Bertolt Brecht. He says, you're like Bertolt Brecht, and Zappa's never heard of Brecht. And Kofsky can't believe it, because Kofsky he's older than Zappa, I think, but he's come out of a critical tradition, the left critic, and Bertolt Brecht is a hero in that world, and he thinks Zappa is a left-winger. They think he's projecting this countercultural left-wing thing into Zappa, and he can't believe that Zappa is making powerful art, but has not been groomed in the right areas or the proper studies, has done his Brecht study. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
And that's because that's where Kofsky doesn't understand how new. McLuhan said in 66, 67, we're going to see Twiggy's just the beginning. We're going to see all kinds of bizarre, strange forms showing up, or strange people, because there's lots of room for them to show up in. There's a whole new vast media environment that needs to be filled up. So Kofsky, he doesn't know how someone like Zappa could come and appear to be revolutionary and have no reference point that Kofsky had.
Okay, yeah.
Much like me and Ben. Kofsky is Ben, and I'm Zappa. I'm running a revolution, and Ben's saying, well, where are you using Marx? Are you quoting Marx? Where's Marx here,
Right. Kofsky, I think, took a lot of flack. I read a really great book about a year ago on the history of jazz criticism, and he took a lot of flack for being, very Marxist-oriented with, I think he did some book on Coltrane or something, and he tried to do the same. Yeah, he tried to fit Coltrane's music into this, sort of leftist perspective or something, and most people saying that's ludicrous, it's ridiculous, whatever. But
yeah, he disappeared. I don't know what happened to Kofsky. I mean, he didn't have much staying power.
So did Zappa ever anywhere comment on, to your knowledge, McLuhan?
Well, with me a couple times. Nothing.
Oh, you must have asked him. Obviously, you interviewed him, right?
All right, but I knew him since 1958, so I was always telling him about McLuhan. But here. He never said anything in public. There's no comment written or uttered. It's like he didn't know who McLuhan was. But when I first was mentioning McLuhan to Zappa, I showed him the black book, The Medium is Massage, came out in 1967. He says, yes, someone gave that to him recently because it was big in 1967. Everybody was looking at it. It just was around everywhere. He says, yes, someone showed me that, Bob, and I read it on the airport. And then, interesting, but he had no more say about it. All right? Yeah. So then, through the years, I'd be mentioning McLuhan here and there, but he wouldn't respond. So finally, in March 85, middle of March, I went up to his place on Woodrow Wilson Drive, and he brings it up. He says, hey, Bob, I just saw the documentary on McLuhan, which was done by his daughter, McLuhan's daughter, Stephanie McLuhan, and it was on CBC or something first, and did well, and then PBS played it. So he had never, other than there's a diary entry where I put him together with McLuhan and LaRouche. If you go into my diaries, you'll see on June 18th, 1967, read that gathering. But nobody knew then who anybody was. This was before Zappa was famous, before McLuhan was famous, before LaRouche was famous, before Mae Brussels was famous, and the other people I have in there. Okay. And you'll see by the entries, what people say, they don't know who each other is, and so probably out of that is when I showed him the Medium is Massage book, so Zappa realized who he was with, and. So he read the book, and he had no comment on it. And you might see some of his comments on McLuhan in that diary, because they all comment on each other. And they comment on Krishnamurti, who comes and speaks to them. So anyways, this was set up in Stanley's Bar in the Village, where Walter Bowie used to work in the early 60s. Okay, so here we are in 1985. I've been trying to get him to talk about McLuhan or take an interest, but he's reluctant. And Zappa... he would talk about events, but always from his point of view. He never really discussed other people's ideas. He would discuss his reaction to what was going on in the media or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right, okay.
So, anyways, what was I? Okay, so he says, I saw the interview with McLuhan, the documentary, and he says, he looked like he was not all there, Bob. And I said, well, that's because McLuhan was an actor. He was putting on. You're picking up something that's not genuine there, or something that's not involved like a normal person being interviewed. Well, you have to realize that McLuhan was saying things as a stick to hit you over the head with.
Right.
So, and he was doing it very casually, so yeah, maybe it would look like he's not all there, but it's a cagey way McLuhan was being. And okay. So, and that was the last time we talked about McLuhan. I mean, it was, that was the only. So, he probably didn't agree with me. He said no, he wasn't all there. But that's what here's McLuhan, a Canadian academic, a stuffy guy probably to someone like Frank, and he just couldn't. He had no clue what McLuhan was talking about.
Yeah.
he was like, the guy is like not staying on topic. He's not all there. He can't focus. You know what I mean? It's something like that.
But so would it be similar to Meltzer in some ways, though, that about like Zappa and Meltzer both, obviously would be aware of McLuhan, and neither of them maybe had any clue as to what McLuhan was actually saying, but in their own ways, they're actually kind of mining similar terrain or something? Or
well, they're both trying to be critics. And McLuhan was a critic of the society, and they're trying to be critics, and they are dealing with...
you mean, right?
Beg your pardon?
When you say, you mean like anti-environment.
Right. And they both are... let me say, they're both all three are being anti-environmental, but Zappa and Meltzer are kids compared to the level McLuhan's talking on. I mean, there are professors, what was his name, James Carey, famous American professor who got interested in McLuhan and Harold Innis in the 60s. Well, Lance Straight and those guys at Fordham University who started the Media Ecology Association, they also are part of the New York State Communication Association. So I went to one of these things in the fall of '98, and James Carey gets up. He's the keynote speaker and tells his story about how he was met McLuhan, liked McLuhan, then decided McLuhan was not really worthy, and Harold Innis was better. But the interesting thing is, this is 1998, and he's wrestling with the fact McLuhan has come back stronger, being the patron saint of Wired, and is back in the news. And Carey's trying to figure out, well, why did this dumb McLuhan come back? He's trying to figure it out. So he confesses. So he went into a confessional. He said, when McLuhan came to my university, I was very active in helping kids to avoid the draft. He was a young professor, part of the whatever you call that radical group that was trying to save kids from going to Vietnam. And McLuhan came in, and I wanted to, harness this great mind to help our cause. And he says McLuhan was totally indifferent to the Vietnam problem. He would just say, well, this is just Custer's last stand, or it's hot politics and the cool medium TV, there's vast, quote, generalizations, and he would not get involved with the issues for the students. And that really angered James Carey. So he said, well, McLuhan's not hip. He's not involved. He's off in his own world. He's not all there. He doesn't even understand what the problems we have today. And discounted him from that point on and got into celebrating Harold Innis. And then became a famous communications professor himself. Got awards, got a position at Columbia, and still had to wrestle with the ghost of McLuhan. So I talked to him later about some of this stuff, but the thing is that they didn't understand. Here's McLuhan comes to a country. He's talking to the whole country and then going to China and speaking to them, then going to Australia and speaking to them. Why should he get involved in each little country's problems? He's trying to offer a huge level. He's saying, look, we got all these problems in different countries. Vietnam was one of them in the States. The reason is we got television. We need to turn off television for 6 months, and that'll improve a lot of situations. This is what McLuhan believed. And he would apply that to all cultures all over the place. Well, you don't have much TV, so we'll give you TV. Over in America, you got too much. We need to turn it off for 6 months. But in Australia, we're going to have more TV for a while because you get too much radio, and that makes you different. Look at the vast scale he's operating on. So he was acting out Gulliver's Travels. Lemuel and Lilliput. All these little midgets were saying, "Well, come and help us with our birthday cakes. We're out of chocolate. Or our kids are being killed by a monster," and he's just passing through and offering a huge, big level of anti-environmental perspective. Okay, look at that level. Meanwhile, Frank is trying to figure out how to get in the White House. Meltzer's just trying to make a living, and they're being anti-environmental on another level.
Okay.
So definitely Meltzer's trying to be anti-environmental in a smaller context, and so is Zappa. Zappa's on a bigger level than Meltzer, but not on the level of McLuhan.
Okay.
But then the big levels, McLuhan understood this, there was no bird's eye view anymore. The big level I'm implying McLuhan was on was super aware, because you couldn't have that visual perspective flying over the landscape and looking at the lay of the land from high up as an eagle. You couldn't do that. That was eye-based. You couldn't have a lofty position on the top of the mountain anymore. And so McLuhan even knew that what he was saying could be just considered a local stuff like Meltzer or Zappa, because there is no mountain to look at things from anymore.
But he was pointing it out at least.
Yeah, he was on a new kind of mountain. He was in the middle of society, sitting beside Meltzer and Zappa, talking about the new mountain, which is not eye-based. It is looking at the ground of the tactile effect. It's like a different level of ESP.
Okay.
So that's now you see, you get Meltzer complaining about Zappa, the master, the lofty guy, in the little world of rock, right?
Right, yeah.
He's saying, like, it's almost like Meltzer is a little Lilliputian and Zappa's a Lemuel, and he kind of resents that. And the reason he resents it, because everybody subconsciously knows that everybody's canceled out, so everybody's in the same boat, so you can't be superior to me.
Right.
But only McLuhan could explain why that was the case and how to change it from that.
Okay.
So that's a level of superiority McLuhan was justified in having.
Okay.
But he was not being the traditional kind of a superiority literary complex.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, it's interesting what you're describing about Meltzer and Zappa, and you said I think in our second chat or something, you used the word skittish to describe Meltzer in trying to write about Zappa. I think I'm in full agreement with that, but you kind of have to do some reading between the lines when Meltzer is writing about Zappa in some ways, because my sort of contention is when I look at the excerpts of stuff he's written on Zappa and Aesthetics of Rock, it's almost like he's not fully prepared to like deal with him or something, and I sort of sense in some places that he's kind of almost suggesting that this guy is kind of doing what I'm talking about. And I don't know if I'd say go as far as he's saying, how dare he, but almost like, but he's not really getting it. He writes about him very differently than anyone else in the book. Like, I mean, even Dylan, he sort of, Dylan is just kind of another guy that he can use his music for his own sort of means. But with Zappa, there seems to be a slight bit of confusion or something there. Yeah. I don't know how to describe it exactly.
I can pin it down with what I've said is Meltzer is trying to get to the top of the mountain. He thinks you can get as a writer to the top of the mountain and expose what's being the conditioning factors and what we're being duped by. He does not understand. What McLuhan knows is that you can't get to that point of perspective. We're all inside the Android meme, and everybody participates in it regardless of your stance. Meltzer doesn't get that. Now, Zappa gets that on his level. Not as deep as McLuhan, but he ends Freakout with saying, well, maybe I'm just an entertainer here to play, That's that last song. Maybe it's not. What is it? Maybe it's not me to say. I'm not here to say, point out, and criticize. I'm just here to play. Zappa has an intuition of everything being swallowed up by the electric vortex, and that's why he criticizes student radicals like Hoffman and everybody. He criticizes everybody because they don't know how big the TV environment is, and he does say it. There's a couple of quotes there. He comes across as kind of a middle-class conservative. He recognizes you can't beat these huge forces, but maybe we could handle them a bit better by improving the content or not being such Puritans about sex and different things like that. Here's the thing: Meltzer is trying to be on the top of the mountain. He sees.
I don't know if I agree with that, but go on.
Yeah,
go on.
Well, you'll get this one. So Meltzer's looking at Zappa. He wants to be on the top of the mountain. He sees that Zappa is perceived as being on the top of the mountain, and that Zappa seems to be believing he's on the top of Zappa's mountain, and Meltzer objects to that. He says Zappa's not doing it right. It's almost Meltzer's almost saying, now this is what's interesting, he's almost saying, well, Frank is trying to make revolutionary music, and that's not the issue anymore. It's not revolutionary music. Revolutionary music is whatever's happening. So here's the interesting point, is that Meltzer has the McLuhan view in his puny little perspective, and he thinks Zappa doesn't have it. Zappa has the McLuhan view that he's not just a musician, he's on a political agenda, and so Zappa knows that he's not limited to being the top musician that Meltzer's projecting that Zappa thinks.
So say that again. Say that again. The last sentence. He knows.
Meltzer is.
Zappa knows that he's not.
Yeah, Zappa knows that you cannot. Zappa knows he's being seen as a genius musician, but he knows, almost like Meltzer, that being a genius musician is irrelevant. That's why he's going into politics. He's going into a bigger happening, a bigger sculptural concept of molding the environment. So Zappa knows that he is that people are being misled, thinking that he's all out to be a genius musician, and Meltzer thinks Zappa is thinking that and resents that. But Zappa actually knows that the environment is bigger than Zappa and bigger than Meltzer. Meltzer knows the environment is bigger than Zappa. McLuhan definitely knows it.
Well, so that's interesting, because that's the rock critics in general have almost like had a chip on their shoulder about Zappa for that exact reason. I think they sort of treat Zappa like, here's this guy who thinks he's so smart, but they're not really maybe getting like that what he's doing. I don't know.
That's okay. The thing is, everybody actually half sees what McLuhan's talking about. They all know. That's why the popular version of McLuhan is, you'll be famous for 15 minutes and that's it. Okay, so everybody knows that by the 70s in the entertainment business and all levels, all the rock critics. And they don't see it as deeply as McLuhan, but they use the Warhol thing. So if anybody goes around thinking that they're on top of this whole thing and they can produce art that lasts a long time, or they can pull off something that has staying power, Chris Gow and those guys will say, well, he's deluded, And they thought Zappa had that attitude. They didn't know he didn't have that attitude.
Okay, yeah.
He always said, this is just for me, his music. But that's just the music. But he also was working on another level and ran for president finally in 91. Then he got cancer and it stopped, but he was starting to talk about it. And you will hear an amazing statement in that the last interview. He describes it. At the end of the interview, he describes how he would run for president. He's thinking about it. And you know what he'd do? He said, I wouldn't campaign at all. I'd just sit home here and take phone calls. Now McLuhan said way back, in the 60s, 70s, that you can run a presidential election from a TV studio. You don't need to do all this running around campaign. You just have debates and interactions in a TV studio.
Yeah.
Okay? He's actually saying very close the same thing as Zappa. Zappa has an instinctive understanding of that, knows it's just a media phenomenon, so I just do it from my home. And McLuhan's saying the same thing. That's what's interesting, how Zappa is like a McLuhanite, unconscious McLuhanite, in the American context. He definitely is not on the international context that McLuhan's working. McLuhan's working with all different kinds of cultures. But okay, so here's Zappa. He knows more than Meltzer recognizes, but he will. Remember, he's invading the music scene. as one of those famous DJs in Q107 interviewed Zappa early 80s, and I spoke to him after, and he says, he's saying it was fun, but, Zappa's a snob. Zappa's a snob. And
right.
If you know Frank, he was not a snob, but when he walked in, it was a military operation. He walked into a radio station, he would be there to criticize it, not talk about the puny thing about music or what's happening. He would often criticize it by making fun of other stars, but he was always talking about serious, quote, serious political issues.
Right.
And for most people, that's boring. What a boring crank Zappa is talking about, immigration or something. And they just want to.
He was punk in that way too, I would say. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, but he was a literate punk. I mean, he wouldn't just express disdain about whatever's going on. Okay, you're saying the punks were political?
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that it wasn't just about music for him in that way, and I think that is kind of very similar. Like when I say punk, I guess I'm putting him in the vein more of like a Johnny Rotten or something like that.
Right, and they come in and snub their nose at everybody and tell everybody to piss off, and they understood the politics of that, but they could not sit down and talk about issues too articulately for very long.
No.
They couldn't see when you go into another environment. You got to be able to put on that you know what you're talking about. Zappa could go into any environment and put on what he was doing appropriate to the situation.
He did the thing with the PMRC or whatever.
Yeah,
was a brilliant sort of move, and
he cut his hair. He presented his image. He knew exactly where he was going and the ground rules. And you know the story that he got background information from Mae Brussel thanks to me telling him about Mae Brussel.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he called her up just before he went and said, give me the dirt on all these guys. So she told him, the skeletons and all the major politicians he was going to deal with in their background. He didn't use it, but it gave him some ammunition that he could feel confident or superior to them because he had the goods on them. You know what I mean?
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
That he didn't use it, but he just knowing it
helped him feel superior to them and to say these are little puny, corrupt guys. They're fakes. They're fakes. That's what he go in with that, and he knew that he could not be intimidated by them.
Yeah, okay.
And he gave Mae, this is 1985. He gave Mae a computer after that as his little present to her.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyways, and that was because I gave him some Mae Brussel tapes in August '84 at the Limelight in New York City. That was at William Irwin Thompson's Lindisfarne Institute that we talk about in my dialogues with Scott around my book Phatic Communion. William Irwin Thompson, good mind, worth knowing what he's saying. The Limelight was taken over from his David Rockefeller funded institute on the corner of West 20th and 6th Avenue, New York City, and was made a disco by a famous Canadian guy who in the 90s got busted. Peter somebody?
I don't know.
He had a big disco empire, got busted for drug dealing. And or having that in the Limelight thing. But in August '84, Zappa was there one night, and I went there. He was there just featured to sign autographs, just sitting in the side of the disco. And I told him about Mae and said, I'm going to send you these tapes. And then he played in Nova Scotia November 6, 1984, in Halifax, and I met with him the next day, and we discussed the tapes that he had received by that time.
Huh.
And then he called Mae up in August '85, September '85, because the Congress thing was September 19th, '85, I think. He called up Mae a few weeks before and got the information. And then I was always in touch with Mae, and I called her up. I didn't know that had happened. And she says, hey, Zappa called me, and she knew of Zappa and told me. And then I started, before I could say it, I started to say, well, she says, I know you caused this, Bob. I know this came to me from you. And she knew that just intuitively. Then I told her how it happened, the details. Anyways, why are we saying all this? Oh yeah, so he that was for musicians, that was a concept, a performance he did as a musician. Post John Cage, anything you do and you claim it's a composition, it's a composition.
Right, okay.
But that's just a category for the critics. Zappa's a great artist. He can think in those terms. He's a multimedia artist. Yeah, but Zappa wouldn't limit himself to just that. He was still trying to become president.
Right, okay.
So, and that was all music, but it was only music for those that thought music was an important private concern. That's why I say he was more than a musician. more than any category you want to put on him.
Right. Okay.
But Meltzer and them, they're all concerned about music, and this guy has some kind of authority in it. He's really good, but his attitude's off, or he's not a tribal guy. He's an old-fashioned, literate, isolated individualist. You know?
Okay.
So he's just not.
Okay. Well, the only I guess thing I sort of was about your calling Meltzer, or saying, you know, he was trying to get to the top of the mountain kind of thing. I don't know. I mean,
no, as he was trying to write, you know what it means to be top of the mountain. He was trying to offer a writerly expression that's X-rayed everything, and he knew. You can see it in the things we did in session 2. He knew that how impossible it was to do that.
Right. So you're not saying it is some kind of status sort of movement?
No. He was.
Okay.
He would say, you know, that Aesthetics of Rock is like celebrating some stupid, you know, song by Smokey Robinson or something. You know, not that stupid, but just as transitory pleasure, and then trying to relate it to the meaning of experience. All these philosophical categories that he had gotten in college, his literate background, and he knows even that's silly. So he's like, the point is that Zappa, Meltzer, and McLuhan are seeing the same thing, but only McLuhan would explain why Meltzer and Zappa see it.
Okay.
See, Meltzer thinks he's seeing something. McLuhan knew, he'd gone through the vanishing point, even seeing from the level of the mediumism massage was, quote, futile, you know, under Android meme global theater conditions.
Right. Although he wasn't. Well, the Android meme is getting ahead of him, though, isn't it? Or?
No, the Android meme started in the 60s, and he starts making references to not that term, but the same simulated. He writes about psychedelics positively in the mid-60s. He writes about the cyborg phenomenon in 65, 66. He's right up on what MIT and the leading thinkers before it becomes Wired magazine are talking about. You know, 20 years before. And so I'm saying that the position in this amazing environment that's both, as Arthur Crooker says, ecstatic and depressing. This is the way we live. We oscillate between ecstasy from whatever we're digging, the information input, and the isolation that the environment creates for no chemical body, human scale community. So we go between ecstasy and manic depression all the time. And so here's McLuhan explaining why, and Zappa wrestling with it a little more comprehensively than Meltzer, and Meltzer wrestling with it within the writerly medium. So, see, Meltzer doesn't know. He doesn't, because music is a concern. It's his art almost. What he's addicted to. He thinks Zappa is a musician, and an old-fashioned musician. And then you get into that complex stuff in his articles about irony and put on, and it's all interesting. We could find them and quote some of them. It's pretty interesting how he tries to categorize. Zappa is an ironist, but he's not super ironic like the Beatles.
Right. Well, actually, I've got that quote in front of me. Let's look at it actually. So it's page 8 of Aesthetics of Rock. I think in the printout or the web stuff I sent you, I think it's the very first one actually. So in the footnote, so it's a footnote. There's some reference in the main body of the text to the phrase senseless masochism. So he says in the footnote, you know, senseless masochism. But that of Frank Zappa and the Mothers surpasses Lennon's because the former seems to have missed, perhaps by having become too old for a while, the whole sequence of English rock explosions. Consequently, Zappa thinks he has to bother with empty parodies of early rock emptiness without realizing that the Beatles and everybody else have coped with that work problem. That is senseless masochism, especially when there's nothing else left from before to bother with, and gotten it well out of the way and or internalized it as second-nature roughage, and he never parodies much of England except Donovan. Okay, well, there's a lot in there to unpack, but but it sounds like he's kind of saying, I don't know, like Zappa and one is surpassing Lennon, but what he's actually doing is already been done by the Beatles. I find that kind of confusing.
Yeah, and that is an excellent perception if you understand McLuhan. I mean, this is a symptom of the dilemma McLuhan's pointing out, and Meltzer is, you know, intuitively expressing it, but he doesn't fully get it. He personalizes it too much. So So here,
right, very personalized that, and that's. I'll let you say your point, but that's another interesting thing about Zappa in the book Aesthetics of Rock. It's one of the few people that Meltzer almost kind of he tweaks towards the personal with him for some reason.
Yeah, he's not going to say Zappa's worth all the adulation he's getting, and Meltzer is right that a guru of music is irrelevant in our global theater. He's right about that, but he doesn't know that Frank knows that.
Okay.
He's being fooled by Frank being. I mean, Frank would be the haughty composer in certain situations, and then just the good old boy in another situation. He was changing, depending on who he was with and who he wanted to be contrary with or not.
Right.
He probably that later article where Meltzer meets Frank in Gloucester's office, and I've been at Gloucester's office at that time, right around that time, about 77, and he's like a little kid, and he feels like Zappa's the master by then, because this what we just read is written 10 years before.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there he is. He's before a guy who has established a certain powerful reputation, but he knows it's an illusion. Meltzer knows it's something silly, and he thinks Frank believes it. And Frank probably knows, though I'm not sure. He probably knows a bit about Meltzer, and knows that Meltzer is a guy trying to get to the top of the mountain of anti-environmental role-playing. And Zappa then puts on this whole haughty thing in relation to him as a joke on Meltzer.
Right, okay.
He gets fooled by the role Zappa puts on in front of Meltzer.
Although Zappa hated the critics, though.
Nah, he didn't. He would say that to the critics just to bug them.
Okay.
If he was, he didn't. Zappa didn't, as a public opinionator, he didn't like anything.
Well, one thing that's okay.
But that's not the way he was privately. He liked a lot.
Yeah, no. Okay, well, I'm sure, but there are. I know now of two anecdotes where, and it's only two, but I think it's just interesting. In that piece you're referring to, where Meltzer went to interview him, he tells a little story about how Zappa called up some newspaper because they got all their facts wrong about the show or whatever.
Yeah.
And then in an interview, I forget where it was. It was something I think I saw online, actually, or an MP3 I found online with Lester Bangs, an interview from 1980, a great interview. And he gives some anecdote about Zappa, and Bangs did not like Zappa at all. Like,
right.
Him, it's not even a begrudging kind of respect. Although early on, I think he did like him. But he mentions this story about how, I think in Cream magazine in the mid-'70s when Bangs was there, they slagged one of Zappa's records, and he had put an ad in the same issue, like on the back cover or something, and Frank was so pissed off that he called up Cream and was complaining to them, and then Bangs said, he wrote off this letter to him saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Multimedia Genius, something like that. So,
yeah.
So it's funny that like Frank would actually on these different occasions sort of pick up the phone, and call these magazines to complain about what they're doing. I find that really fascinating.
Well, Zappa understood that electric media reduced everything to human scale. And back 100 years ago, you couldn't write Charles Dickens if you read him in the States or something. You could write him, but you couldn't call him up directly. Zappa used the technology, just like he did with rock music or trying to become president. He says, I can get into this mix, and these guys think you can write stuff and it goes out there. They're talking to me. I'm right here, and I'm going to call you up and call you on it.
Right, yeah.
And that was an anti-environmental gesture by Zappa. It was a put-on.
Well, and I think that ties in a bit, I think, with what I think one of the valuable things in Ben's book is he's constantly kind of pointing out how, and this is maybe a kind of even a bit of a Marxist thing too, and that there's always this kind of demystification thing sort of happening with Zappa. Like he's always dealing with exactly what's going on, and he's telling you about it.
He's in your face.
So he's not like just if he's got a gripe with the magazine, you think, fuck it, I'll call them and rather than observe that there's this line between critics and musicians or something.
That's right. He's in your face, and all his early albums are in your face.
Yeah. And
he knew that's what the electric. He may not have technically spelled out like McLuhan could, but he instinctively knew that. Right on Absolutely Free, he says the CIA is creeping around Laurel Canyon, and he also begins by saying the president is sick. He confronts. He goes right to the highest levels and confronts her right there on the album. So he knows. Okay, what was Ben's book? Ben's good because he knows that Zappa is confronting everybody in the present and is doing it as a put-on, but also multi-level put-on. It can be serious as much as you want to take it. Remember what Dylan says on the liner notes of John Wesley Harding, the little story about Zappa. The three kings come to Zappa and they ask, what's up? And he says, well, how far do you want to go in? And that's Zappa's ready to go all the way if you want to. So Ben does that. Ben does a book on Zappa as a put-on to get into your face because you missed the meaning of the punk movement and you missed the meaning of Theodore Adorno and you missed the meaning of the Socialist Party and Marx. You know what I mean? He just hijacked Zappa for other purposes. Zappa did the same thing. And the Zappa fans don't understand that when Ben does Zappa right back at them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they just complain that he got a few facts wrong or something.
Yeah, or they say, well, Zappa never read Shakespeare or this and that, and they think that's... No, it's not. It's not.
Right.
That's
not the point.
Yeah, it's a tradition of put-on, of satirical Menippean put-on that Ben does. He didn't know he was a Menippean. He didn't know that word, but now he realizes that he was that.
Okay, so that's the point, though. This is going back to last week's conversation. I mean, that's what Lipstick Traces is. Like, you kind of put me a bit little on the spot last week, rightly so, saying, well, what did you get out of Lipstick Traces? What was it about or whatever? And, I mean, it's very similar in that regard. It's basically different voices, from the century, people completely unknown to each other having a conversation with each other.
Right, and that is, okay, first of all, I'd say he's celebrating certain critics, different strategies of criticism, of anti-environmental shamanism. But he doesn't get the obsolescence of every one of those moves. He's celebrating them and doesn't know why they're obsolete. So it becomes just a book of art history. It's just a book. If you want to really be a relevant critic, don't make your book a book. And that's what Ben's book is, not a book about Frank, even though it's apparently that. So he's saying there's this conversation going on. Well, he doesn't include the advertisers and how they're
well, no, that's not true. He does actually. He does. I mean, he does pull ads and stuff into his book. I think I'm pretty sure he does.
But does he say they're of equal momentum as the Situationists or the Sex Pistols?
Well, I mean, he may not devote as much space to them, but he's still pulling them in. I mean, does McLuhan quote advertisers with the equal momentum that he does Joyce? I mean,
yes, he did a whole book.
Part of the mill.
He did a whole book on ads, two of them.
Well,
but here's the thing: is that Marcus will select interesting ads that he thinks are neat, just like he selects the interesting art movements, like the.
Well, but it's more than that. They're neat. It's that they're speaking in this same language. Which he would call a mysterious language that he's trying to figure out. But he's not just pulling them because they've got some neat picture on them or something like that. Like, he's actually quoting them and trying to make sense of what they're doing with, and showing how here's this ad completely unconnected, and it seems to be it's Dadaist or something like that.
Right, and he doesn't know that advertising as a whole environment, regardless of what ads you like or don't like, advertising as a function itself really upsets everybody way more than the Sex Pistols or the Situationists or whoever else he has in there. And that's what McLuhan would say. He said Abby Hoffman came on Mike Douglas on one of those shows in '68 and declared his Yippie Revolution, and then Marshall says, and then the advertisement came on and canceled it immediately.
Right.
The advertisement function itself is the Menippean Situationist Sex Pistols environment. That's
right.
what they don't even have a clue. Marcus doesn't have a clue. He's trying to figure out what's pure consumption and what isn't, or what's political, a political sign system or a political meaning. And whereas Zappa gets to that level of McLuhan almost, not as complex or complete, but he understands. I mean, look, do you know anybody who came up with a song and in the middle of it goes, so what the fuck? That's such a great line in the middle of a song, where Zappa's expressing the cancellation of any effort immediately due to the electronic global theater. So what the fuck? It's hilarious.
And that reminds me of Aesthetics of Rock, kind of.
Yes.
like the more I do think about aesthetics of rock and Frank Zappa, like the more I do see them as parallel efforts. And I do agree with you that Zappa's taking it further just by sheer dint of the fact that he's using more mediums, and not just music, but music is obviously the primal one, but he's also suiting up and doing the PMRC thing and the running for president and all that stuff,
and calling up people and hassling them. Just calling them up, and
exactly, yeah.
And which is why Wyndham Lewis was the first prank caller. Did you know that?
No.
He would, back when phones were around. I don't know if it was.
I was going to say the phones must have just been sort of still. Were the phones still a new? No, they would have been around for what, 20 years by that point?
Yeah, sometime in the 20s or 30s. I'm not sure when.
Okay.
Wyndham Lewis every morning would take out the phone book, and accidentally, what do you call it? Haphazardly pick a number. Just place his finger blindly in the middle of the book or something.
Wow.
Call that number and harangue the person for a couple of minutes. They wouldn't even know who he was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he was a phone prank call. He knew he could. It was his art. Hey, I'll wake this guy. Here's a number. I'm going to call this guy and wake him up.
Wow.
Why wait to put a painting in the gallery that guy may never see? I have a medium, a telephone, to call anybody and harass them, or do an aesthetic data move on them.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
No, that's totally amazing. Did he write about that, or like how did he must have told? I guess,
yeah. People knew about it. I can't remember where I heard about it. I mean, I spoke to him when I was young, but I didn't know that stuff, so I didn't ask. But the other people written about it. Maybe Hugh Kenner writes about it in one of his famous books on Wyndham Lewis.
Okay.
But that sensibility of looking at what's available. I mean, he's on duty. Wyndham Lewis every day. Okay, who am I? Joyce ends Portrait of the Artist as Young Man with the line, and it's supposed to be Stephen Dedalus saying it. I go forth for the millionth time to forge the uncreated conscience of my race, and that's the end of the book. Well, Lewis would say, well, Joyce, that's rather dramatic. Have you called up anybody today? Have you harassed somebody with the latest medium? Rather than writing a book where you claim you're forging the uncreated conscience of your race.
Right.
And that's what Zappa has. It's very interesting how Zappa and Joyce Zappa and Beefheart physiologically can look like Joyce and Beefheart. Mix them up. Look like Joyce and Beefheart. Zappa they look like Joyce and Lewis.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Zappa and Beefheart.
So why do you think?
Here's the thing. Hold that thought. Just want to complete what we're saying. Yeah. So Meltzer, he can only bug people by writing a review, whereas Frank can get radio interviews and do all kinds of stuff. He did do. Like later I said, he did the radio show, and I think he actually did get booted off. And actually, let me just tell you one thing. He actually did a preamble apparently before the last Sex Pistols concert at I think it was at Winterland in San Francisco or something. You mean up on stage?
Yeah, like he was actually like sort of not like an MC, I don't think, but he was actually sort of went up to almost give like a kind of performance art or something, or a spiel, and apparently it was like just so offensive that I think even Greil Marcus like wrote some piece I think Meltzer actually said, well, Marcus never liked my book initially because of or he never liked me after I did my thing at the Sex Pistols, but I actually upset him more than the Sex Pistols did probably, because I guess he just went up and was saying all this like really like just the most vile kind of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, he was trying to do a Zappa. See, this is the point. Meltzer and Zappa have the same perception, same goals. Zappa a little more comprehensive. He has more abilities and more media he can work with. But that's why Meltzer presents himself as a little puny Lilliputian in relation to the master. You know what I mean? And Bangs had the same kind of grievance. That's why he called him multimedia genius. You have access to way more than I do. I just got the Village Voice or Cream magazine.
That's interesting, yeah.
And so they're writers, and they're saying, damn it, this guy, he doesn't have to be a writer. He's not starving. He can play music and enter and bug people on whole levels, bigger levels. So that's going to make them feel inferior and resentful.
That's what it. Yeah, like I thought there was some kind of resentment the way Bang said multimedia genius, but that gets it.
Yeah, and you can use McLuhan for the bigger frame to get into these things. You can talk about, this is a literate culture, baby boomers up against an acoustic space environment, and you can get into all this sociological, anthropological levels, and then go over and read French rock critics, if you could read them, translate them, and then do the sociological on them. McLuhan go around the whole planet discussing all the little Lester Bangs in the different countries. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And the Meltzers. Okay, that's a big level. Now, within American culture, Zappa is a mini McLuhan in relation to Meltzer, who's a James Carey, angry that Zappa is not hanging out with him and down in the bar or something, or hanging out with punk groups, not helping with the draft resistors, which is what James Carey felt about McLuhan, right?
Okay, yeah.
And multimedia genius means you're everywhere. You're all over the place. You're not just worried about writing in the Village Voice or Cream magazine. Have you ever seen remember Cream magazine had Boy Howdy?
Yeah,
profiles?
Their mascot, yeah, the Boy Howdy profiles. Yeah, Zappa's in there, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yes, in the middle 70s, there's Zappa. I don't know if it was real or not. Zappa is standing in front of a truck and a plane. And of course, the Boy Howdy profile, they don't get mad at Frank in it. They kind of just say he's a great guy and all this and the little details. Sure. But there's Zappa. At that time, he's got his own plane, his own truck. He's got everything. He's got all these vehicles he can use. Now, it might have been just that one time, or it might have been a put-on. He may not have had that plane. But Zappa had himself photographed with all these resources. That's the picture of him in the Boy Howdy profile.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, I think it's in that profile. He did say this, or he got them to say this. The basic chief feature at the bottom, it says, permanently stuck in 1966. Which is, I can see Zappa allowing that to be put in because most of his fan base was. They didn't like the way he was going in 75. He was moving into other stuff.
Right, okay.
So, but what's interesting is you got Meltzer and McLuhan and Zappa having the same chemical body brain perception, right? You're just a brain. You can't see everything. You're not a satellite camera, but you can look and you see, and you've got that Menippean detachment, and you can see through the airsats and the environments all around you. Meltzer and Zappa and McLuhan have that, but McLuhan's older. He's got a lot more range of experience and knowledge than they do. They're just young kids compared to McLuhan.
Right, yeah.
So let's look at what Meltzer says about McLuhan.
Let's look at that one. Yeah.
Okay, where is that? I have a few of these.
The very first.
Right.
Figures that I sent you.
Okay, so what? This. You have him say at the bottom, as mere TV. I want to go back and deal with that statement on Zappa. That's really good.
The one about the Beatles,
senseless masochism or whatever.
Right.
But.
Let's do this McLuhan one.
As mere TV personalities, the Monkees are the standard McLuhan-esque, in quotes. Then he puts ha, which is like he self-consciously knows something. It means something to him to go ha.
Right.
Or he's, okay.
It's almost like, almost, or something a little bit. That's how I sort of see it.
Yeah, McLuhan-esque was a criticism back then when he's writing this, so he's almost self-consciously, I'll use your term, McLuhan-esque, but I'm going to do it differently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Monkees are the standard McLuhan-esque, non-personal personalities. Okay, where's the next? I got to get the next part. Perfect. Where does he say? Perfect example of even hack McLuhan's inability to cope with the Beatles' super personality in films of them as Beatle films. Now, what he's trying to say there is exactly what McLuhan can do.
See, okay, so let me take a stab, and you'll obviously go 50 paces.
Yeah, I'll go run around the lot. I'll lap you 10 times.
And I'll just be waving as you go.
Yeah, you're the little Lilliputian. Let's see your puny English language attempt. Okay.
Well, no, but I think it's kind of a generational thing. Obviously, I think it is kind of puny. But he's saying, this guy could never really get right inside of, he could never fully understand this Monkees Beatles thing the way I could because I'm here living the life, and he must see him as some guy with like a tie who is like sort of suddenly all the rage or whatever.
Okay.
So by calling him a hack and saying his inability to cope, it's like this guy he can't really see what's going on.
Right. Now here's the incredible irony. The phrase non-personal personalities, that means they're iconic figures. Okay? Iconic. They don't have private points of view. They're there as a marketed image to teenagers to make teenagers believe there's still humans on the planet.
Right.
Okay? They don't. The music industry does not want kids to find out that it's just an android meme, a Gorgon monster that gives them no place to stand. Okay.
Right.
The non-personal personalities are exactly what McLuhan said the Beatles were. Okay. He's saying McLuhan can't, and that's why he says McLuhan-esque. He kind of realizes, but he goes high. He kind of realizes. Okay, he's sort of agreeing with me that the monkeys are serving the iconic role that McLuhan first defined for the TV environment. Okay, mere TV personalities, the monkeys are the standard McLuhan-esque non-personal personalities. A perfect example of even hack McLuhan's inability to cope with the Beatles' super personality in films of them as Beatle films. Now, McLuhan understood that the Beatles brought back human scale, that the global theater, paradoxically, brought back human scale, and that they were appearing to be super personalities, not non-personal personalities. The very thing he's saying McLuhan doesn't see is what McLuhan pointed out in the 60s. But he doesn't know McLuhan well enough. He's just taking the standard. He knew McLuhan said something about TV personalities are iconic. Yes.
Yeah.
But that is in the 50s. You have iconic personalities in the 50s. As the satellite shrinks these environments and allows you, gives you the perception that you can float around all these media, then it becomes one-on-one, which is what Frank's doing. He's calling up Cream Magazine and talking to you directly. The Beatles are super personalities, super identifiable, anthropomorphic entities that can be in everybody's environment because of the mixed corporate media world of the global theater by the 60s. It's not just black and white TV. You got radio, magazines, all this stuff is blossoming. What I call broke spirals of media on my chart. You've got all this stuff, and the Beatles can show up in radio shows. Radio stations, and Meet with the Mayor, which Lennon complained about. They're available. Okay, that's super personality. And then he's saying, but he's really talking about the film, and films of them as Beatle films.
Right.
So that even the Beatles, their films were casual, interpersonal. They were like kids just playing in the film medium, hijacking the film, the great archetypal Hollywood film medium, and you got to be a qualified director to make one of those movies. They just come in and play fun in front of the camera, right?
Right.
Okay, that's providing human scale for the youth market and creating a genre called Beatle films. But McLuhan would write about that. See, this is the thing: is that Meltzer is taking what I call the Madison Avenue, hardly read version of McLuhan. People didn't read McLuhan enough to figure out the sophisticated level McLuhan was talking about in the 60s that Meltzer is claiming McLuhan doesn't get. He definitely gets that. And McLuhan even meets the Beatles and stirs Lennon up. And you see, as I told you, I guess last week, read the interaction with John Lennon by McLuhan.
Yeah.
Okay. McLuhan upset Lennon. Lennon felt that he was not as hip as McLuhan when he met him.
Yeah.
Okay. The monkey pole move has always been obviously inevitable. And that's android mimic. The overstatement of its eventual actuality is its rock grandeur. You see, once rock became a guaranteed environment in the 60s, after the Beatles made it acceptable, then it was marketed by the android meme as the monkeys, the cloning of it.
Right.
And so and that was inevitable because music was a huge environment that kids needed all around the world, and that industry would carry on, and the revolution or whatever people thought the Beatles were, and then when they went and met the Beatles, they saw a million other kids were there too. Well, where are all these other kids? I thought Dylan was speaking to me,
Right, yeah.
The impersonality of that environment, and then the Beatles, the monkeys overstated. It's not an overstatement. It can be seen that way. I can see his point. But the overstatement of its eventual actuality is its rock grandeur, because the Monkees are accepting the role of ersatz rock for the teenagers who are going to need it inside the global theater. It's what Croker writes in the 90s about, what's he call it, the recombinant commodity. Recombinant commodity. It's like a genetic engineered cloning of the media environments. I went to a panel at DIA, famous art museum institute in New York, and Crisco and all these rock critics would get up there, and they were doing their bit, and I got up and I said, "You guys are all genetic engineers, and you have no clue of what you're producing." That's how I began. I won't go into all the details. I announced they were genetic engineers. Okay, so that's another topic.
How did that go? Did they say? Did anyone?
Well, they snickered. The one,
because I've heard about that specific conference. I think the DIA, all the rock critic. Was that like in mid '90s or early '90s or something?
Late '90s. Dina Weinstein.
Late '90s.
You know the name Dina Weinstein?
Yeah, she's got a book on metal. I've got. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Dina is the wife of Michael Weinstein, and Weinstein is the co-writer of Data Trash with Arthur Croker. And I was quoting Arthur Croker and Michael, her husband, back to her. Okay. And she was the only one who kind of snickered. I don't know how savvy she is of her husband's work, but I think she kind of knew what I was doing. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And she came up after and walked over to me and started looking at me. I was talking to someone else. She comes over and stands and listens to what I'm saying to somebody, and she was looking at me, and she was sizing me up, and she was sort of twinkling, and then she said, "Nah, I don't think I'll talk to him." Or I didn't make an effort to talk to her. But she said, "This guy is where did he come from?" kind of thing. And I think you can get the transcript of that conference.
Oh, really? I should.
Yeah, something like that. But that's where I confronted Crisco about Zappa. That was on a private level, but that's another thing. But anyways, I went into the rock critic world and tried to say what I'm getting an opportunity now to say way back then, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So look at the footnote there on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. So then he says, just to continue that sentence.
Okay. Yeah.
The overstatement of its eventual actuality is its rock grandeur. That's cliche. McLuhan's title, cliched archetype. The cliche of rock music is archetypalized by the Monkees within a clone society, and they're necessary recombinant commodities.
Okay.
So anyways, I can understand exactly what Meltzer is trying to get at, and then point out how he misses the guy who said it before Meltzer did, McLuhan.
Right.
and being, quote, quite prepared for that eventuality has been big since Hard Day's Night anyway. Well, that's my point. Hard Day's Night set the cliche, and then it became archetypalized. Or you could say reverse, depending. The Hard Day's Night's the archetype, and Monkees are the cliche replay.
Right. Okay.
But he is actually perceiving its archetypal, the Monkees, because of the way he says the overstatement of its eventual actuality. In other words, the archetypalization of its eventual actuality, which is the cliche, the archetypalization of its cliche is its rock grandeur, which is like archetypalized squared.
Okay.
Okay, so at the bottom he says, McLuhan's only move is the pop status he has inadvertently attained, and his jargon is nice as misused plagiarism. Now,
it's true that it's not his only move, but I mean the pop status is inadvertently attained, right? That in itself is not an incorrect statement. That's hardly his only move. I mean, that's when he puts that tweak on it, it's kind of ridiculous.
No, McLuhan was Howard Gossage, the advertising genius, who, quote, got all those magazine articles written about McLuhan. He approached McLuhan, said he was going to do it, and McLuhan could have said, "No, I'm not a sellout," or whatever he would say. He agreed to it. McLuhan welcomed the pop status, but he did not.
So, sorry, tell me that again. What that was actually this was something specifically. Like I thought. So tell me. I don't know that reference.
You don't know how McLuhan became famous. I was behind the scenes in this, but just go with the public record.
Okay.
It's not on a public record other than my statements that I was behind the scenes. But there is a public record. You get Don Thiel's book on the called The Virtual Marsh McLuhan with an appendix by McLuhan's best buddy Ted Carpenter, where Carpenter talks about watching McLuhan being made famous. Now, what he did, he attended the meetings in San Francisco at Howard Gossage's ad agency. As a matter of fact, I hope I still have it. There's an interesting article on retrospective about Howard Gossage by someone in San Francisco, which was done recently, talking about what an amazing ad. He was the king ad prankster. I mean, he just created all kinds of sold a lot of stuff. He was the genius of advertising, at least on the West Coast. Now Mary McLuhan has personally told me some aspects of it. Howard Gossage and Jerry Feigen, I think, who was a doctor, they were flying to New York for other reasons, and they were reading Understanding Media on the plane. And I don't know if it was a private jet. It must have been. I'm not sure. The story is they read the book and they said, geez, this guy's a genius. Let's go meet him. And they forced the plane to be redirected from New York to Toronto.
Wow.
And they come to him. McLuhan's never heard of him. They walk into office, McLuhan Center for Culture and Technology, and make this proposal that we're going to put on a McLuhan Festival, and we think you're great, and we're going to make you famous. Okay? McLuhan said, well, screw you. He could have said that. But what he did is he had some meetings in San Francisco with Gossage, and Ted Carpenter describes those meetings because he attended them too. And Ted Carpenter's of the temperament. He doesn't want McLuhan to be a sellout, and Ted Carpenter himself wouldn't do it. But he watches how Gossage and them say, we're going to get your name in all these articles, and Carpenter presents it as very cynical, what Gossage and them are doing, and he's upset that McLuhan's going along with it. And then he says in this article at the back of Don Field's book, he says, my God, all the articles showed up for the next 2 years. Gossage pulled it off. He made McLuhan famous because he had that clout, being a top advertising PR guy. Okay. So Gossage makes McLuhan famous, and Ted Carpenter thinks McLuhan's over his head. He doesn't understand McLuhan knows exactly what he's doing. He's now entering the global theater Android meme. He knows he'll be totally misinterpreted and all garbled, and he writes that this will happen, and yet goes into it because he knew he has to implant his meme in the Android meme.
Right.
You don't exist unless you're in the media. So he advertently attained it. He didn't care about it, okay?
Yeah.
He knew it was one of his strategies. Just like what would be one of Zappa's strategy would be don't do the PMRC. Zappa knew that he would get a lot of attention doing it because he knew he would do it well.
Right.
Okay, so McLuhan said, well, there's another way to get attention, and then people can see my serious questions I pose, my serious analogical mirror or anti-environment I provide. And then it says, and his jargon is nice as misused plagiarism. Now, it's true. You could say McLuhan plagiarizes if you understand that McLuhan never had an opinion himself. He just would take quotes from all over the place and fit them into his sensory profile bias. You know, this guy has a visual bias. That guy has an acoustic bias. This guy's tribal. This guy is literate. He would, so what does he mean by misused plagiarism? It was actually very well used plagiarism. I mean, he attributed the quotes, but you could say if someone is just quoting people, then he appears not to be being creative.
Right.
This charge is thrown at me all the time. Well, what's being creative is that you're showing the collage of the information environment and showing all these different perspectives, showing the common denominator, and then critiquing that common denominator.
Right.
And it would appear to be jargonized.
And is it not exactly what Aesthetics of Rock is trying to do in some ways?
Yes. He's trying to do it on a puny, very tiny little scale within.
Sure. But I mean, it's funny that he's throwing this idea towards McLuhan.
He's doing the same thing as he did to Zappa. He does not recognize they're doing the same thing that he's doing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's maybe time to end.
You know what? Just to put a neat finish on it, not that there's such a thing as a.
Well, you came to an insight. You get the pattern I'm talking. That's good. We should rest. Well, no, we can carry on. You go. Yeah, I get you, Bob. So these statements by Meltzer are really good statements. They're good material to work with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't agree with them, but they're great words, and they are a level of sophistication that we can then clarify.
Right. Well, you mean you don't agree with the one regarding McLuhan specifically?
No, this statement by McLuhan, by Meltzer on McLuhan, the footnote, McLuhan's only move is the pop says he's inadvertently attained, and his jargon is nice, is misused plagiarism. I agree with that, say 49%.
Yeah.
But there's a 51% level that Meltzer doesn't know that I can use, but I can express, but I can't express it unless I have a great statement like this.
Right, yeah. Okay. It's another thing to use to get to
refine what's really going on. Look at the very bottom. Oh, before I go to the bottom, this is what Ben says. He loves talking to me because I help him refine what he thinks because I give him chewable stuff that he can work with. Meltzer gives us chewable stuff, good quality stuff to swallow and shit out, and expel. But look at the very bottom. He goes, and the Sinatra something stupid is more of the same old, great, impotent, but now incestuous swill, in brackets, unity of form and content. That's exactly what McLuhan says happens under global theater conditions. Unity of form and content. And he doesn't know. See, Meltzer's just arriving at a perception of sophisticated perception level that he doesn't know McLuhan has, and if he studied McLuhan, then he wouldn't have to spew all this stuff out and struggle to get it. He'd realize, oh, McLuhan got it, and then figure out how to understand McLuhan and realize, well, what I'm seeing is what McLuhan's pointing out.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder why he did quote McLuhan in that art.
Because it's part of the icons of the day. Rock music is the icon, the news of the day, and he's mixing in all the newsy stuff, the Monkees, Andy Warhol, this and that, happenings. He's just scanning the environment.
So do you think, did many people who wrote about McLuhan in the 60s, did they understand it? I mean, I know there were some sort of stupid reviews of him and stuff, and
nobody.
I don't know.
Nobody. The only guy who was close was Don Thiel, and he wrote he ended up president of Trent University. He was a well-respected professor, and other professors that knew him because he helped do the Explorations magazine with McLuhan, and made the proposals. He wrote the proposal that Carpenter and McLuhan put together as a 22-year-old in Toronto in 52 for the Ford Foundation. They got the grant. But anyways, Thiel was an insider. Okay. And he wrote a book on McLuhan, and it came out in 1971 called The Medium is a Rearview Mirror. And many of his colleagues said it was the best book of McLuhan, and it is, until the second book he did on McLuhan in 2001 or 2002, I think. But the point is that even Thiel, his book was so good that McLuhan tried to stop it being published.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's a whole story. You can read it at the back of the Virtual Marsh McLuhan. There's an appendix by Ted Carpenter, which I was just telling you about, and then there's an appendix by Don about the suppression of the medium as a rearview mirror, and it's a very interesting thing. And if you want to be educated, you got to read that book. It will give you, and then you figure out what it means. But so Thiel was the only one who did it, but he got it so he didn't get it perfectly right, and McLuhan took issue with it.
Right.
Okay. So what were we saying? So nobody got it, and even Ted Carpenter.
Wolfe, none of those guys, obviously.
What?
Like Tom Wolfe or none.
Nobody.
They just wrote about his personality, really, in some ways. Or...
They were puppets in his theater. He knew they wouldn't get it. He knew they didn't understand what he was talking about. But I was going to say that Ted Carpenter didn't even get the 60s McLuhan.
Okay. And
dropped out from it. And I've talked to Ted about that. I mean, he's like Meltzer. McLuhan sold out, and
right.
was a hack. And I tell you, you want inside information. You read Don Thiel's The Virtual Marsh McLuhan, read his story of how McLuhan tried to suppress the book, and they brought in 5 university presidents to resolve it.
Wow.
And because it was the first book being launched by McGill Queen's University Press. It just started in 71, and this was their launch pad rocket ship book. And then McLuhan botched it up under the impact of his agent, Matey Molinaro, which is another thing. But then you read Ted Carpenter's appendix on how he saw the changes McLuhan went through. You need to know what these very intelligent insider people thought happened to McLuhan. And I say you need to know that because McLuhan is very important, and you need to know about what his buddies thought of what happened to then get to the point of understanding what I'm saying about McLuhan.
Yeah, okay.
That's real rock criticism, Don Thiel's book.
Okay. I'll look into that.
Yeah, when you have time. So I think you were going to say something else? Okay.
No, well, I was going to say rather than, we've got 2 options here. We could wrap it up, or if you wanted to go back to that one quote,
Zappa?
to look at the Zappa.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Let's look at that and end after that.
Okay, so he says, he quotes John Tingley. You know,
Right.
John Tingley, I think he's an artist named on Freakout by Zappa.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he has a few, modern artists in that 189 name list, or 179
Okay.
names, something like that. I think it's Tingley might be on there. John Tingley's self-destroying machines, that's accurate, McLuhan and Zappa would understand that, have sometimes not worked and have thus failed to fail. That's very important. Remember McLuhan, Zappa writes in his autobiography about how important it is to be able to handle failure, and he's all for failure. So did McLuhan say that. So here's the young Meltzer kind of intuiting that's what modern art should do, because you don't want to set up any hypnosis. Anyways, Bohm's, and he's the famous, mystic from 300 years ago, I assume that's what he means, or Bedyev's ordered suggestions of primary chaos, or yours and mine. That's very good. You have primary chaos. That's the global theater, or yours and mine. You're all in the same media environment. Can therefore be viewed in the same light as positive inconsistency. Now the inconsistency is just nonlinear acoustic space tribal stuff, and McLuhan would look at that clinically. It's a little too subjective saying positive inconsistency. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Unless you're trying to be tactile, and then you would be a collage of inconsistency, and that's what McLuhan did. And so did Zappa. John Lennon, once apparently working toward D. Gerber's highest conception of art, that of senseless masochism. Now that's true. If you're going to be an old-fashioned artist, you're going to be beat up. You're going to be famous for 15 minutes. And so if you're conscious of that, you can put on being senselessly masochistic. So John Lennon once prolifically endeavoring to build John Lennon once apparently working toward seemed once prolifically endeavoring to build a toothpick pyramid that would blow away overnight. Okay, so that's we now understand why he says in his footnote senseless masochism in italics, because it's a conscious act.
Right.
Senseless masochism. But that of Frank Zappa of the Mothers of Invention surpasses Lennon's, because there's where he thinks Zappa is trying to be the high art, top of the mountain guy.
Yeah.
Doesn't recognize Zappa's not trying to do that, though Zappa would put on that for those that need it. Surpasses Lennon's because the former Zappa seems to have missed, perhaps by having become too old for a while. Too old would be too literate, too master genius, the old Gutenberg archetypes. But Zappa didn't do that, but it could be projected on the teen industry, rock industry, that Zappa was doing that. So he's saying Zappa, that Zappa fails because he surpasses Lennon's and actually, quote, achieves something, right?
Right, okay, yeah.
Because he became too old, that means became like the older generation who grew out of the Depression, the pre-boomer generation, who back in those days tried to have an identity. But the young, hip baby boomers know you can't have an identity in the global theater. So Zappa accidentally went too old just for a while. That means he put on being a great artist, capital A artist, great composer, present-day composer refuses to die, the quote from Perez.
Right.
Okay, so he says Zappa, he doesn't know that Zappa is not doing that. It looks like Zappa's doing that, and Zappa, fails better than Meltzer and celebrates it. Remember his famous quote, "How would you like to be remembered, Frank?" "Oh, I hope I'm not remembered at all, and I don't think I will be remembered." Okay, so the whole sequence of look at that. These are very good words, but that of Frank Zappa, the Mothers, surpasses Lennon's because the Zappa seems to have missed the whole sequence of English rock explosions. There's to be famous for 15 minutes. That's what McLuhan said. A rapid series of innovations is ersatz and environment. Within the teenage music world, they got to have new groups coming through every 3 months, being the new thing and upsetting whoever was famous the previous 3 months. Right. And there are a series of rock explosions, and they appeared for the teenagers to be anti-environmental, giving them new insights. Cream was way better than maybe Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Right.
Okay, so the kids, wow, look at this. This is 2 years later, 1967. Cream is great. Pacemakers are good in 65. And so they go through a change and adapt to the new innovation. But it is just a fake innovation. It's an innovation, but it's a fake environment. Only lasts a few minutes, which Meltzer is getting that. The whole sequence of English rock explosions, ersatz and environments, but that's just in the puny world of rock for the consumption of kids within the Android meme. And McLuhan's talking about that same phenomenon on all fields all over the world.
Right, okay, yeah.
Consequently, Zappa thinks he has to bother with empty parodies of early rock emptiness, because there is Meltzer recognizing that these are ersatz and environments, the rock explosions, and so you don't have to parody emptiness because everybody, he thinks instinctively, knows they're empty. And it doesn't matter that they're empty. But he gets himself tied up in a knot here. Zappa knows that. And in the article he writes on Zappa in 1977, he questions whether Zappa did parody the 50s stuff because Cruising with Reuben the Jets is such a great album. It seems to have love in it. So later, 10 years later, he's a little not so sure about saying this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And he leaves it up in the air. He can't decide. Consequently, so you can look at that encounter with Zappa in 1977.
Yeah.
He is meeting the master. It doesn't mean anything to him. Ripe to become a punk. Then punk comes along and he can just blow off his frustration.
Right, okay.
I have to tell you that what's amazing about that article is he answers a question that I always had, because he quotes Zappa. In 1976, I read a quote by Zappa where it was some gossip paper in L.A., and I was in L.A., and it describes how Zappa ran into the big music store and scarfed up all the latest albums, and they were saying, what the hell's going on, Frank? Why are you buying this bullshit, AM radio or just rock radio, FM radio stuff? And Zappa says, I got to find out what's going on. And he runs out of the store, and that's reported. I never had a chance to ask Zappa what went on there. Well, Meltzer read that and had a question about it. He actually solved the question I've had for 30 years. That was 35 years of 76 to this is 33 years later.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that article, so Zappa gives a statement on it, which sort of answers what I thought Zappa was doing. Zappa was just trying to find out what the Android meme was doing.
Right.
That's what he says. Zappa says, I want to find out what these musicians are doing. He actually expressed interest in what these musicians were doing in the way they were playing. But Zappa that was the news for Frank. Okay, let's find out. He was doing McLuhan. Let's find out what the tribes are doing, what the rhythms are, and then I will satirize those rhythms.
Right.
He was not consuming them because he admired them. He wanted to find out how they did it and then make fun of it.
Yeah, it's almost like researching almost.
He was researching, like he was doing an inventory of the society within the rock world, like McLuhan did on a broader level.
Yeah.
So, consequently, Zappa thinks he has to bother with empty parodies of early rock emptiness without realizing that the Beatles and everybody else have coped with that work problem and gotten it well out of the way and or internalized it as second nature roughage. There's a McLuhan term, second nature roughage. Just keep it that. That is senseless masochism, especially when there's nothing else left from before to bother with. In other words, there's no reason to do satire on the emptiness, says Meltzer, and the Beatles and the English rock guys realize that. Let's just go out and make money, or let's just have fun.
Right.
Meltzer doesn't know that. Zappa's doing that as well, but Zappa includes in his fun pretending he's a serious composer and putting that on to bug people.
Right.
So Meltzer fails to get the comprehensive Zappa. He's right. If Zappa was doing that, then he's right. You don't need to satirize what's empty. You just join in and create your own empty products.
Right. Okay.
And that's senseless masochism, because if you become well known with your empty product, you'll get beat up by the press, like the Beatles did.
Yeah.
But you do it as conscious as possible. You celebrate it. Senseless masochism. Most of the rock stars, English rock, whatever, they didn't do it. They all became junkies and died. They couldn't take it. Only Zappa remained above it all, so to speak, and survived his fame and the media abuse.
Okay.
And
oh, never mind. Yeah, okay.
So Meltzer is right to point out the emptiness of music in the global theater. That's what he's doing. It's not even worth satirizing. Just enjoy it as it explodes around you. But even he gets exhausted a year or two later, can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And gotten it well out of the way, and or internalized it as second nature roughage, and he never parodies much of England except Donovan. I don't know about that. too much dues to pay to archaeology and art as imitation. So Frank ends up back in high school, and that's nice too. See, now there's Meltzer doing it to himself. He's not going to get too worked up that Frank screwed up.
Right.
His version of Frank screwed up, and he says, and that's nice too.
That's nice too, yeah.
He's actually on my level almost. He accepts it. But he has to write something, so he's just be in Frank's face, just to separate himself from all the other people who think Frank is great.
Right, okay.
So he says, too much dues to pay to archaeology and art as imitation. That's partly right, but not totally what Zappa was doing. Zappa was doing it because he thought it was nice too.
So Meltzer,
Zappa was just playing with the music, with the 50s, because he liked it.
So is Meltzer trying to say there that he's trying to turn this into art or something?
Are you saying is Meltzer trying to turn his writing into art?
No. Is Meltzer claiming that about Zappa? Like when he's saying too much dues to pay to archaeology and art as imitation.
Yeah, he's saying Frank is being too much the old artist and
right. Okay.
And ends up back in high school.
Ends up back in high school, just making that stuff for fun anyway.
Okay, so Frank ends up back. So what he's saying is that Frank is trying to be a serious artist and parody what doesn't need to be parodied. And if you do that, you're back in high school taking courses on art and archaeology and trying to be a good modern, up-to-date postmodern archaeologist.
Okay.
Okay, but then, see, Meltzer is describing within the rock world exactly the Finneganese and McLuhan perception, but he doesn't know it.
Right.
He doesn't know that this book is good, It Studies Rock, because he's describing the nothingness of music and how vital tactile nothingness is, and he doesn't know McLuhan did it already and explained it.
Right.
So he's the baby boomers' replay of McLuhan and Joyce's sensibility about the information environment, and more evidence proving McLuhan. He doesn't know he's proving McLuhan's point.
Right.
Now McLuhan didn't write a lot about rock, but there's key things he wrote, and he's not only explaining rock, he's explaining why Stephen Hawking shows up in quantum physics or string theory. He's explaining all the fields, why there's a new kind of economist, why Carter is president. He's covering the whole global situation.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, for someone, especially someone of Meltzer's age, it doesn't matter how intelligent the guy is. I mean, in 1966 or 67, whatever, and unless, like, that would be an incredible leap for him to be reading McLuhan's stuff and in some ways being able to apply it to rock, or think that McLuhan stuff could be applied to rock. Like,
right.
That would just be a big leap at the time, I think. I mean,
and that's why I'm the greatest rock critic. I come in and clarify what they didn't know they were doing.
Right.
I mean, he's a young genius, Meltzer, perceptive person, and he's too young to get the scope. He has to grow up. He has to get an identity. He has to get a job and all that stuff. And McLuhan is in 66. He's 55 years old. I mean, he's an old guy. He's seen and read a lot more and understood and interacted with famous people. Meltzer is just beginning that route.
Right.
And Meltzer burns out and drops out of it. So how is he going to understand what McLuhan's doing? You need to wait 40 years till I show up to explain what was going on back then. Because I did my homework. I understood McLuhan.
Right.
Okay. I could have. It would have been interesting to. I mean, I'd read these guys in Cream and say, well, too bad they don't have me to talk to. I used to call up Cream and talk to Bangs occasionally and harass him and say,
oh, really?
Yeah, I used to call him up. This is in 74, 75 when he was still in Detroit, right? Isn't that where Cream was? And and I would I'd always call up with something about use the NLP technique. You know what NLP is? The CIA. If you meet someone, you figure out what their sensory bias is, and you mirror back their sensory bias, usually by which way they look with their eyes.
Okay.
And then you figure out their sensory bias, and then you become that sensory bias, and they'll immediately warm up to you because you've matched with their bias.
Right.
And then you work on them because they've opened themselves up. I would do that bang. I would call up and then mention something in Cream or something that would show that I'm a sort of an intelligent fan.
Right.
of some, and then I'd start flipping it. once we get talking. And I start telling him, look, you're an idiot. You don't even know about Finnegan's Wake or McLuhan, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if I said that to him, but I said something like that.
Right, and what was his response?
He'd hang up. he would, after a while, he recognized my voice, and he didn't know who I was, but he recognized me, and he knew he would eventually hang up, but he didn't do it impolitely. He would say, okay, Bob, that's enough, I'm going. I'd, okay, bye.
Well, see, Bob, what you should have done was call him up late at night, because apparently Bangs used to get drunk and like talking on the phone late at night for hours, so...
Well, that's right. He would talk for a while, but eventually, I could talk to him for half an hour before I turned the knife on him. You know what I mean?
Right, okay.
But at first, I just turned into someone that I don't know who this guy is. He's switching on me, so he hang up. But when I kept calling, after a while, he'd know who I was, and he'd kind of know the pattern, so he'd entertain it for a while. And then I'd start to come up with another way of doing it. And it would surprise him, and then he'd be polite and say, "Okay, there you go. You're turning on me. Okay, that's it. I gotta go. I'm hanging up." So he would tell me he was hanging up.
Yeah. Okay.
And I even did it to Andy. I did it to all kinds of people. Andy Warhol did all kinds of things like that.
Wow.
Phone terrorist,
Yeah.
But I was always saying what I'm saying today. I said, "You guys are screwing up. You're not doing what you could do." And then I would go, "And that's nice too." That's good. You're screwing up. Well, I've said, ignorance creates wealth.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So we've done. So, anyways, it's good that for me, I'm glad to get this on the record. It's
okay, good.
It's like we meet Meltzer and Chris Kelly. This is your life. This is what you didn't do. This is what you did. This is what you didn't do. The high school principals showing up to mark their papers.
Yeah. Okay. So, what do you think? Should we? Did you have anything else about that?
Well, it's interesting. Right below that, it has the thing we read is footnote 7, but it's footnote 8 where he quotes Bob Dylan.
That's right.
And he says, "An evening's empire has returned into sand." That's a really good line, and we'll end with this. The evening's empire is the top song on that night, okay? On the radio that kids like. They used to phone in and vote for some song and some new thing. Has returned, 15 minutes are up, has returned into sand.
Okay, yeah.
But it's hyphenated. It's interesting. It could return because it can come back and have an empire again for a while and then go back and go into sand. It's recycled.
Okay, yeah.
So actually, this is a footnote to this whole thing, endeavoring to build a toothpick pyramid that would blow away overnight. That is a very good description of the meaning of the Dylan line. That's excellent criticism there. He's saying Dylan's line, he explains Dylan's line, "An evening's empire has returned into sand," by saying, endeavoring to build a toothpick pyramid that would blow away overnight, after it's 15 minutes after the DJ went off the air.
Right. And that's what the medium does.
Yeah, that's the way the kids live. They'll talk about who won the song the next day in school, but then the next night it's all start a new contest.
Yeah.
People live 200 years every 12 months.
Right. Okay.
They did back then. Now they don't live, and they're in deep freeze coma for millions of years. Okay. They're immortal. Don't know it.
I think that's a good thought to end this call.
Okay.
So that was great, Bob. Let's do it next week.
Yep, it's very good, and I'm glad we got. It's always good stuff to work with that you found here.
Excellent. Some good stuff again. I'll have lots to play back and try and figure out and absorb. So.
Yep.
Good stuff. I'm busy for the week ahead.
All right, you are. You're definitely back in high school.
Yeah.
You got homework to do.
Exactly.
Okay, but it's like reading. What you come up with is like reading this stuff. See, your responses to me are
it's fun homework, first of all.
Yeah, it's what you want to do, what you want to know.
Exactly.
So what the questions you bring up are inspirational for me to come up with stuff, just like reading this Meltzer is inspirational.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. I mean, it's just I think it's just. I mean, it's funny too. There's still like a crap load of stuff to go through, obviously. So.
Yeah. No, we might be coming around to the same point all the time, but you don't get that point unless you look at it from whole different aspects in the kaleidoscope.
Exactly, and I am I'm very sort of curious to, I'm actually good staying in Meltzer for a little while still because there's still some territory to explore there and everything. But
well, it's crazy enough. It's accurately crazy. I mean, senseless masochism. This is good stuff. I mean, it beats all the other guys.
Well, I'm kind of curious to see what happens even just to the conversation when we get to some of the other guys.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
I have a feeling I'll be sort of, saying no, but this guy's good, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, I mean we're beginning at the beginning, and we don't have to go any further. We will, but Meltzer. Look, I mean, this is most people reading it. What the hell is this? They can't understand it. They won't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's got some good. He's up to date on the art world, from his professor friend Alan Capral. To say John Tingley's self-destroying machines, who knew about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't think Goldstein or Kriskow or Bangs in 1960. Well, this could have been written in 65, 66. It's written over several years. They probably didn't know about it, but he knew about it because he was hanging out with a famous artist.
Yeah.
He was getting a good education at whatever school it was he went to.
I'd love to interview Alan Capral about Meltzer. I wonder if he's even still alive.
Well, you just need to wiki it.
Yeah.
Are we taping what we're saying now?
I assume Scott's. I've got my backup tape going, but I don't know.
Okay, so that's good. Let me.
Can you hear me, Bob? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're taping.
Okay, good. We thought it was sort of the end, but I'll just put in Alan Capral and see if he's still alive. Capral. I think that's his name.
Oh, you know what, guys?
He died April 5th, 2006.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
He was born in 1927. See, like he's in his almost 40 when he's a bona fide arrived artist when he's dealing with the young Meltzer.
Okay, guys, you know what? This is good timing. My baby's actually crying through the monitor, so I
okay. Okay, so great talking to you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, Scott. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.